I think Vietnamese cuisine is so much more than what we're given credit for, because a lot of it is unknown, right? To the masses, right? A lot of it is stereotyped into just banh mi, right? Pho, vermicelli noodle and rice paper rolls. And when people think about Vietnam, when they say, "Oh, that's awesome Vietnamese food," I'm like, man, that's just like what we eat on the street.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. 2 decades ago, the word fusion was a thing to avoid. But in Australia, the rich tapestry of different cultures and cuisines means we come to understand and experience a myriad of cuisines. Chefs in Australia, and indeed the world over, have the opportunity to ply their trade in many different cuisines. And in Australia, that experience sometimes translates into some really special food offerings. Cuong Nguyen is the owner of Hello Auntie and Banh Meats Co. Cuong, how are you going?
I'm good, thanks.
You've applied your trade in some pretty amazing Italian restaurants, and now leaning into your heritage, you have Vietnamese restaurants. What was it like in those early days as a chef learning Italian cuisine?
It was quite natural, actually. I didn't think much of it. I hadn't worked in any other type of restaurants besides Western restaurants. Actually, I was a kitchen hand in a Chinese restaurant when I first started.
You worked with Nino Zaccali at Pendolino. Is there similarities, Italian and Vietnamese cuisine you don't think of as being anywhere remotely similar, but are there crossovers for you?
I think there's crossovers for every cuisine, to be honest. Just depending on what's important in the culture. Does that make sense? Like, it doesn't matter if it's like Indian, like Chinese. Yeah, it's all pretty much the same. It's all got to do with the philosophy behind like what the food means to your culture.
Before you had Hello Auntie and Banh Meats, you had a restaurant that ventured and delved into that world of combining those two cuisines. What was it like doing that?
It was good. It had a good reception response from the public, and I thought it was just easy, like, for me to do, because it was like, at the end of the day, like, Italian food, right, is a lot of pasta, which is like noodle, and then they have a lot of like more peasant dishes, like, and everything's braised, right? So every culture has, like, or ethnic culture anyway. There's a lot of things where you have to kind of stretch the produce out, because we come from like poorer countries.
You have your own restaurants now, and you multiple venues doing your interpretation of Vietnamese food. Can you take us back to where your interest in food first began before we sort of delve into what you're doing now?
Oh man, I've always really been interested in food from a very, very young age. I can remember even when I was studying like design and fashion, I always wanted to like cook. And I thought about doing it, but it never kind of touched until I was like like late teens, early 20s.
And how did you get that start in the industry?
It was really due to circumstance, because I'd had a child at a young age, and I needed something sustainable, like to put food on the table. And that's kind of like, I just kind of fell into it. And yeah, it's it's funny, actually.
Well, take us back to that time. What was it like when you first entered the industry? Do you have any memories of the challenges involved?
Yeah, it was very it was a different time. Actually, it was like over 10 years ago. The challenges I had was I didn't do a traditional apprenticeship, because I needed to like get qualified as fast as I could. So I just did everything full time, and it was hard to get placed in any good venues, because of two things, like the good, like the venues that had, good names, very reputable. They weren't paying, they weren't paying good. And especially they didn't want to take on someone with a ticket and no kitchen experience. Does that make sense? So yeah, so I'd be working like just pubs, clubs, cafes, anywhere that I could kind of get a job that was going to pay me like full freight.
You opened your first restaurant at the age of 32. What was it like leading up to that and creating that concept?
Oh man, like the concept was, it's actually quite a funny story. If I was going to be honest, this was really no thought process in there, right? I just knew that Marrickville didn't have a Japanese restaurant. I knew how to cook, and I liked doing Italian food. And I thought that I would be able to create something that was, a combination of the both that would be able to resonate with the public. So yeah, that's how it was born.
You now have a couple of amazing Vietnamese offerings. Tell us about your style of food and how your interpretation of Vietnamese presents on the plate.
Oh, my interpretation of Vietnamese cuisine, I think Vietnamese cuisine is so much more than what we're given credit for, because a lot of it is unknown, right, to the masses, right? A lot of it is stereotyped into just banh mi, right? Pho, vermicelli noodle and rice paper rolls. And when people think about Vietnam, when they say, "Oh, that's awesome Vietnamese food," I'm like, man, that's just like what we eat on the street, like what the Vietnamese public in Vietnam, that's what they eat for lunch, right? Or like for breakfast. It's kind of like if you explore like Thai cuisine, right? It's like you going into a Thai restaurant in Thailand and ordering a pad Thai.
Well, tell us about the cuisine. We know pho, we know banh mi. What's some of the dishes that you really love about Vietnamese cuisine?
I really love like all the peasant dishes, all the really weird and wonderful stuff that if we made it like 100% traditional for the Western palate, it take a while for it to be accepted, because the flavor profile is so strong and pungent, and it's something that it's not what is it? The public's not really used to it yet. It's kind of like how right now it's like how long I don't know the history, but do you remember shrimp paste? Right? Look how long it took the Australian public or the Western culture to kind of understand shrimp paste and fish sauce. Right? And like even tripe, but tripe is very prevalent with a lot of Western culture as well. Like, the Irish, the Brits, even the Italians, the Greeks, we all eat, they all have tripe. But it's just cooked, it's just done with different flavor profile. And it's just what people are kind of accustomed to.
You grew up in the inner west of Sydney. Tell me about what it was like growing up and the role that food played.
Growing up in the inner west was good. I love it. It was I grew up in Newtown at the beginning, and then we moved to Marrickville. Food has always been prevalent with my family. We were in the rag trade for a very long time, and we used to take turns cooking dinner, my family. And I remember, this would answer your question before about my connection with food. I remember like just being really young and just always wanting to eat other things besides Vietnamese food, right? Because that's all my parents would cook. And then I would always say to my mom, like, can we do like family dinner? Like, so like we will all take turns in cooking dinner. So that's how like I was introducing Western food into my household. And even to the point where my mom started, like cooking it, because, she'd like what I was making, but then she'd put her spin on it. Yeah.
Well, let's look at Hello Auntie and you've got a couple of sites with that, and it's not traditional cuisine, but leans heavily on it. Can you talk about a couple of dishes that you have on the menu and how it sort of typifies your approach to cooking?
Yeah. Well, right now I have this dish. It's a peasant dish, and it's called Tet Heo Co. And what it is, essentially, it's a braised pork dish. I've done it I've reinterpreted it every few years. And the more the more and more I revisit the dish, the more and more traditional it gets. I think it's got to do with me accepting my heritage. Because for a long time growing up in Australia, it was very hard. I battled with my identity for a long time. And now as I get older, I'm finding that I have more of a connection to my roots, and I express that through the food. With the dish now, we braise it the same way. It's my mother's recipe that I've kind of just adjusted the ratio of the sugar and sodium level. But what I've added to it is the pairing of the garnish. So before, like they serve it with eggs, but I'll put like broad beans. So the broad beans will add like a nice bitter taste, a bit of texture. And it's a 2-part process that I do now, and we smoke it. We cold smoke the meat like after we braise it, so it adds a different flavor profile.
What's been the response to your sort of modern interpretation of Vietnamese cuisine in the market, and where do you see Vietnamese cuisine in Australia at the moment?
The response for our cuisine in the market, I think it's very positive. Of course, you're going to have your purists that are just going to, just not like what we do, which is fine. For me with Italian food, like I'm a purist with, pizza and risotto. So like I 100% get it because, there's just people that just, want the really traditional, things. But I think with, the way Vietnamese food is, especially even right now in Vietnam, they're doing really, really like new and exciting things. And it's like with chefs like myself, expats, all over the world that, that live abroad, Germany, Sweden, France, like the stuff that they're doing right now in Vietnam is like phenomenal. Like it's like truly unbelievable.
You said that you entered the industry out of necessity, but you've built an amazing career and have multiple restaurants. What's the last decade been like for you, and what's been the challenges in running your own restaurant compared to those early days of just learning the trade?
The challenge for me running my own restaurant is having to find the balance between being a chef and being a business owner, because the mindset is 100% different. As a chef, I just think about the food. I just think about, making tasty food, and you don't really think about much else. But as a business owner, I have to contemplate the whole picture. I have to think about my team, my staff. I have to think about how it's going to be sustainable. So the mindset is different, and sometimes you have to make compromises where as a chef you wouldn't make any compromises, but as a business owner you have to sometimes make a compromise.
You mentioned a bit earlier that when you were growing up, you battled with your identity and you wanted to eat anything other than Vietnamese food, which was in your family home. Take us back to that time. What was that battle like for you?
It was hard because I went to a predominantly Western school with all I think there was only 2 Vietnamese people in my class, maybe 20 in the whole school. So, and just trying to be accepted as well. And I still remember when I was in primary school going to after school care, still being told to get out of the country and just stuff like that. So it was, it was it was different time, I tell you.
What sort of impact did that have on you?
It was it was kind of heartbreaking, you know. It's just not knowing like where you belong, and also for me, like, and because I lived in when I moved from Newtown to Marrickville back then was like a Vietnamese, Lebanese, and Greek area, but I wasn't accepted as Vietnamese because I didn't have any Vietnamese friends, and I didn't go to like an Asian school, right? So Marrickville was full of like a lot of ethnics, but all my friends were from Newtown still. So like my upbringing was quite different.
You found solace. You found a career and solace in food. What's the camaraderie been like, and how important has that been in your development as a chef?
Man, like the industry is fantastic, and I always say, like, people always ask me like, how have I lasted so long? It's because I love it. You really need a lot of grit, and the camaraderie is fantastic. Even more so now with the young the young chefs now. Before it was really I think like secretive, like no one really wanted to share anything. But now with the way the world is with the media and everything, like people just share knowledge. Like if I need a recipe, if I'm stuck with something, I can ask one of the chefs that I speak to on Instagram or Facebook, and like they're willing to help me like work through my problem with the recipe. Yeah, and vice versa.
You've created multiple venues over the last couple of years. What sort of impact did COVID have on the operations of your businesses?
COVID was very, very tough. I was very concerned with my staff, more so and then I realized, like, man, it's like I needed to look after myself as well. But if I'm being 100% honest, like COVID helped me a lot. It helped me really, find myself again, like as a chef and as a person.
You said that you really love the industry. Take us into the kitchen. How do you think about dishes, and what do you love about creating something new?
Right now, my philosophy to like Vietnamese cuisine, at least, is I want to take something like old and create it in a new way without disrespecting or like losing the too much of its essence in bringing it, giving it a new, giving it new meaning.
You said that COVID helped find yourself as a chef and a person. Can you explain that to me?
I think it goes back to my battle with my identity. So for like after when I first opened Hello Auntie, like I had like clear vision about what I wanted to achieve with Vietnamese food. I had a lot of drive, and I think the first 1 or 2 years with the food that I was doing was very strong, and it was on the path to what I wanted to do. And then when they when I started opening other businesses, and I believe that I grew a little bit too fast, and I kind of lost my way, like with what I wanted to achieve with the food and who I was. And I was like losing my way came with like losing my identity as well, because I thought that I had to be a certain way and cook a certain way for for the public. And then when COVID happened, it made me realize that, man, it's just like with everything that was going on, like I needed to go back to my roots and just remember like what I did at the beginning. It was successful, it was good, and it was something that I really wanted to do and wanted to achieve with Vietnamese food, especially. And that's kind of what I went back to.
You mentioned Vietnamese street food a little while ago, and you created Banh Meats Co, doing some pretty amazing things. Can you tell us about the creation of that and what you're doing?
Well, oh man, with Banh Meats Co, it was really my interpretation of what I think the banh mi, or like the Vietnamese sandwich can be, because ideally it's just meat and bread, right? And when I was in Vietnam, like the best like banh mi places, like just was purely just like these great cold cuts, or like even like nice cuts of beef. Not beef, pork, right, with pate and very few other fillings, like no pickles, no, like it wasn't like this huge like sandwich stuffed with like the way like how we get it here. Does that make sense? So I tried to recreate that, and it was hit and miss, right? And because I tried to, yeah, I thought I was thinking too much and I was trying to be too clever. And it wasn't until, I just went back to basics and kind of really condensed like all the best sellers and just removed the noise. That's when it became really, really successful. I just made everything really, really simple. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that you used to have cook-ups at home and you would introduce Western food to the family. Do you remember, is there any dishes that you remember cooking for your family that they hadn't experienced before?
Yeah, like roast chicken. I did roast chicken. I remember making, like I remember back in the 80s, right? The biggest thing was, do you remember spaghetti sandwiches, baked bean sandwiches? Do you remember that? Like in high school? Dude, it's like I didn't even have I didn't have any of that ham sandwiches, like, peanut butter sandwiches going to school. So my mum would always, because like they were always too busy working. So I'd always get lunch money, right? And I'd always be buying meat pies at school. Back then you could get a meat pie and a drink, right, for like $2, right? So I remember, and then making all these stews, and I remember like the meat pie. I'm like, oh man, just tastes like one of my, like one of my mum's stews, but in pastry. So I would, or a sausage roll, right? So I'd go and I'd try to get like short crust pastry. I didn't know what puff pastry was back then, but I'd buy pastry from the supermarket, and I'd get my mum's, stew, and then I'll put it in a pie.
Wow.
I'd make that. Yeah. And I remember eating, making spaghetti sandwiches at home, and my mum's like, "What's that?" Because it come out of a can. So she saw that I kept buying this canned spaghetti, and then so my mum makes, she decided to make it one day, right? And she'd made this ragu out of like beef mince, but then she'd Asian it up by putting like miso, soy sauce, like quail eggs in there. But she didn't know how to make a tomato sauce, so she just used like tomato paste as well. So this thing was like, it was. I still have memories of it now, man. Like it's like every time she used to make it before, like I'd love eating it, but I just remember this is not it. But it was so cool. And like now every time she makes it, I love eating it. But back when I was growing up, I'll just be like, oh man, she's stuffing it up.
Was there anything that you cooked and introduced that your family didn't like?
Not really. I wouldn't know if they didn't like it or not. My mum's been really, really great. She's always been very, very supportive and encouraged like my development and growth with anything that I do. So yeah, it's not really. I think I made a soup once that no one ate. So
you learnt your trade in Italian restaurants, and now you have Vietnamese restaurants leaning on your heritage. But when you're away from the business, what do you like to eat?
Man, like if you asked me this question, like like even 2 years ago, it'd be totally different. But right now, I like to eat like anything that I am not cooking. So I'm to look on a serious note. On a serious note, I like eating really, really simple things, like nothing too like overly complicated. Just meat and veg, steak. Like even to a point where sometimes I'll just eat vegetarian. Yeah, just to kind of get away from the noise. And right now I'm a purist with like the food. Like, so if I eat a steak, I'm just gonna like out of the out of the business, I just eat with good cut of meat, dry aged, or like a really nice grain fed or grass fed, and just with salt and pepper, bit of lemon. That's it.
You're a part of the new wave of Sydney chefs and restaurants at the moment. What excites you about the food scene in Sydney?
Oh man, I think this food scene in Sydney is gaining like great momentum. There's a lot of great young chefs, a lot of like really passionate people that are becoming a real like driving force in Sydney. And there's a lot of great concepts coming up. And COVID's fun. COVID's like been able to what is it like birth? Would that be a correct word? Yeah, birth a lot of new venues. Like there's a lot of great venues popping up now.
You mentioned that the changes you're able to implement because of COVID has been a real help for your businesses and yourself with what you do. What's the plans for the next couple of years?
We've got our for growth for our company. We've got our eye on a few locations that we're scouting. We have this legacy program in place with the company where we help the people that work with us over long periods of time. We give them opportunity to be business owners. So it's something that is good for us. It's good for them. And it's all about what we practice as well. Just kind of giving new future to our staff.
You mentioned the challenges involved with identity growing up, and then also with your own food later on as a chef. What are you most proud of?
If I'm completely honest, what I'm most proud of is not got to do with the food. It's got to do with what I've been able to do with my team. I've able to help them grow as individuals and professionals to the point where there's people that came to me with zero experience, right, and now are like running my business, and within the next 2 or 3 years they're going to be owning like a business. So for me, like just being able to pass on the knowledge, the skill set, like everything that I've been able to accumulate within the past 20 years, I'm able to pass that on to people that, people around me.
Well, that is an amazing legacy. Cuong, we've loved having you on Deep in the Weeds to share your story and look forward to see what's next for you. Please keep in touch and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of Australia's hospo community, suppliers and producers in search of hope during this pandemic. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.